You are, at this exact moment, absolutely certain that you're reading these words. You can feel your eyes moving across the screen. You can feel the chair underneath you, or the phone in your hand, or the ground under your feet. And here's the thing, nobody wants to sit with for too long. None of that certainty actually proves any of it is real. Not the chair, not the screen, not the person who supposedly wrote this script, not even the version of you that feels so obviously, undeniably present right now. You have never, not once in your entire life, experienced anything except your own mind. And you never will, not the outside world directly. Not another person's thoughts directly. Just an endless, unbroken stream of your own private experience, and a very strong, very persuasive assumption that there is something real generating it. This is called the egocentric predicament, and once you actually understand what it's claiming, it becomes almost impossible to unknow. In the same way, you can't unsee an optical illusion. Once someone points out the second image, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's not a fringe idea some guy came up with to sell podcasts. It's one of the oldest, most rigorously argued problems in the entire history of philosophy, and the honest answer to it, after literally thousands of years of some of the smartest humans who have ever lived working on it directly, is that nobody has solved it. Not definitively, not in a way that survives serious scrutiny. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why. Let's start with what the predicament actually says, because the version most people have half heard somewhere is usually watered down into something much less unsettling than the real thing. The egocentric predicament, a term coined by American philosopher Ralph Barton Perry in the early 1900s, states something deceptively simple. Every single thing you know, believe, perceive, or experience passes through your own consciousness before you have access to it. There is no alternative channel. You don't have a backup way of checking reality that bypasses your own mind. Even the act of checking, touching the wall to confirm it's solid, asking a friend to confirm they see the same thing you do, running a scientific experiment to verify a claim, all of that checking still has to travel back through your own senses and your own consciousness before you can register the result. You're trying to verify your mind's reliability using the exact same mind whose reliability is in question. It's a closed loop with no external exit. Think about what that actually means for a second, because it's easy to nod along and miss how total the claim is. It doesn't just mean you can't be 100% sure about abstract philosophical questions, like whether God exists or whether free will is real. It means you cannot, even in principle, step outside your own perspective to confirm that the coffee cup on your desk exists independently of your perceiving it. You experience a coffee cup. You do not experience a coffee cup existing independently of your experience of it. Those are two completely different claims, and only the first one is something you actually have access to. This is where René Descartes enters the story, because in 1641, in a work called Meditations on First Philosophy, he tried to do something genuinely audacious. He tried to doubt absolutely everything he could possibly doubt systematically on purpose, to see what, if anything, survived the process. He doubted his senses, because senses sometimes deceive you, optical illusions, dreams that feel completely real while you're having them. He doubted mathematics, imagining a scenario where some kind of powerful deceiver could make even 2 + 2 = 5 feel absolutely certain to him. He doubted the external world entirely, the possibility that everything he perceived was some kind of elaborate illusion. And after doubting literally everything he could think of to doubt, he found exactly one thing left standing. The fact that he was doubting at all proved that something was doing the doubting. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Here's the part people skip past way too quickly, because it sounds like Descartes solved the problem right there. He didn't look closely at what actually survived his radical doubt. Not the world exists. Not other people exist. Not even my body exists. The only thing that survived was the bare fact that some thinking process was occurring. That's it. That's the entire foundation. Everything else, the external world, other minds, your own physical body, had to be rebuilt afterward, using additional assumptions Descartes needed but couldn't actually prove with the same airtight certainty as the original cogito. Modern philosophers have spent nearly 4 centuries picking apart exactly how shaky that reconstruction is, and the honest consensus is that it's considerably shakier than Descartes wanted to admit. Let's make this concrete with the version of this problem that tends to actually keep people up at night. The brain in a vat thought experiment. Imagine your brain right now, sitting in a vat of nutrient fluid in some laboratory somewhere, with electrodes feeding it perfectly simulated sensory signals, indistinguishable in every way from the experience you're currently having. Every sight, every sound, every physical sensation, the memory of your entire life up to this point. All of it generated artificially, and none of it corresponding to any actual external reality at all. Here's the genuinely uncomfortable question philosophers like Hilary Putnam have pushed on this scenario. Is there any experience you could possibly have, any test you could possibly run, any thought you could possibly think that would definitively rule this scenario out? And the honest answer, when you actually sit with it instead of dismissing it reflexively, is no. Because whatever evidence you'd use to rule it out would itself be experienced through the same channel that might be entirely simulated. You cannot use the simulation to disprove the simulation. Every single piece of counter-evidence you could generate would be exactly the kind of counter-evidence a sufficiently good simulation would also generate, which means it counts as evidence for nothing at all. This isn't just an old philosophical curiosity either. It's had a genuinely strange afterlife in modern physics and computer science in the form of what's sometimes called the simulation hypothesis, most notably formalized by philosopher Nick Bostrom in a paper published in 2003. Bostrom's argument doesn't claim we definitely are living in a simulation. It makes a narrower and honestly more unsettling claim. If it's technologically possible for an advanced civilization to run enormously detailed simulations of conscious minds, and if such a civilization would plausibly run many such simulations rather than just one, then simulated minds would statistically outnumber non-simulated ones by an enormous margin. Which means purely on probability, you'd be more likely to be one of the simulated minds than the one original. Bostrom isn't asking you to believe this. He's pointing out that the egocentric predicament makes it genuinely impossible to rule out, using tools borrowed from statistics rather than ancient philosophy, and arriving at essentially the same unsettling wall Descartes hit 400 years earlier. Now here's the turn, the part where this stops being a fun thought experiment and starts becoming genuinely important, because the egocentric predicament doesn't just apply to whether reality exists. It applies with exactly the same force to whether other minds exist. This specific version has its own name, the problem of other minds, and it deserves to be taken just as seriously as the reality question, because it's arguably more disturbing. Here's the argument in its simplest form. Your own mind exists directly through immediate, undeniable experience. You are certain you're conscious right now because you're the one having the experience of consciousness. But you have never once, in your entire life, directly experienced another person's consciousness. You've only ever observed their behavior, their facial expressions, their words, their actions, and inferred from that behavior that there is something it's like to be them, the same way there is something it's like to be you. But that inference is exactly that, an inference built entirely on the assumption that beings who behave similarly to you must also be conscious, like you. It has never been, and by the nature of the problem can never be directly verified. The other person could, in principle, be what philosophers call a philosophical zombie, behaviorally identical to a conscious human in every observable way, responding to pain, laughing at jokes, crying at sad movies, with absolutely nothing happening inside. No actual felt experience whatsoever, just an empty, dark process producing all the right external behaviors with nobody home. Sit with that for a second, because most people have genuinely never confronted how strange this actually is. Every person you have ever loved, every friend, every family member, every stranger you've ever made eye contact with on the street, you have taken on faith, and only on faith, that there is something it is like to be them. You cannot prove it. You cannot even in principle prove it, because proving it would require somehow experiencing their consciousness directly from the inside, which would just make it your consciousness, not evidence about theirs. The egocentric predicament doesn't just isolate you from the external physical world. It isolates you, in the strictest possible philosophical sense, from every other mind that has ever existed. So where does this leave us? Because it would be intellectually dishonest to just leave you sitting in that isolation, without at least addressing how philosophers who've spent their careers on this have actually responded. The honest answer is that nobody has produced a knockdown, universally accepted solution. And after several centuries of extremely smart people trying, that absence of a solution is itself meaningful data. But there are serious, credible responses worth knowing, and they roughly fall into a few camps. Some philosophers, following a line of thinking associated with figures like Descartes, more argue for what's sometimes called common sense realism, essentially pointing out that radical skepticism about the external world, whatever its logical merits, is a position literally nobody, including the philosophers arguing for it, actually lives as if it were true. More's famous response to skepticism was roughly to hold up his own hand and say, here is one hand, and here is another, treating the plain, undeniable practical reality of everyday experience as itself a stronger foundation than any abstract argument, attempting to undermine it. It's not a logical refutation. Exactly. It's closer to an argument that the demand for absolute proof was always an unreasonable standard to begin with, one that would, if applied consistently, make literally all knowledge impossible, not just knowledge about the external world specifically. Others, working in a more pragmatist tradition associated with philosophers like William James, have argued that the question of whether you can achieve absolute metaphysical certainty is, in practice, the wrong question to be asking at all. What actually matters for a functioning human life is whether a belief works, whether it lets you predict outcomes, coordinate with other people, and navigate the world successfully, regardless of whether it can survive an infinitely regressing demand for logical proof that, by the nature of the egocentric predicament, no belief could ever fully satisfy anyway. Under this view, the fact that you can never definitively prove other minds exist matters less than the fact that treating other people as conscious, treating the external world as real, has never once failed you in any way that a competing belief could have avoided. Here's the genuinely uncomfortable and genuinely honest place to land on all of this. The egocentric predicament is not a puzzle waiting for someone clever enough to finally crack it. It appears to be a permanent structural feature of what it means to be a conscious mind experiencing anything at all. You cannot get outside your own perspective to check it against some external perspective-free reality, because the very act of checking would just be one more experience happening inside that same perspective. This isn't a limitation of current technology or current philosophy that some future breakthrough is going to resolve. It's closer to a limitation built into the basic architecture of what a mind is and what a mind can, even in principle, ever access. And yet, here you are, reading this, feeling reasonably confident the chair is real, reasonably confident the people in your life actually experience their own lives the way you experience yours, getting up in the morning and acting almost entirely without hesitation, as though none of this problem exists at all. That gap between what you can philosophically prove and what you actually functionally believe every single day without a second thought might be the single strangest and most quietly remarkable thing about being a human mind. You've been living inside an unprovable assumption since the moment you first opened your eyes, and it has never once stopped you from getting out of bed.